Mind Bend. Non-ordinary and extraordinary states of consciousness for Mind Bend Creative.
Thanks for coming by to share your story today, Juan.
No, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it was cool to meet and just feel that you were willing and interested in speaking. Well, you came to an event that the likes of which you hadn't ever been to before, really.
Yeah,
that was
first
kind of
time.
new territory.
Exactly.
How would you describe the where I met you, like the event that we connected at?
I mean, it was like the venue itself.
It was like a book release.
Yeah, no, it's
yeah.
The fact that there's more awareness coming to these different modalities for, treating addiction through, plant medicine, psychedelic means. I think it's, it draws a lot of people in from different demographics, and it was just beautiful to be there. I mean, especially since for me personally, to attend something like that, it's not necessarily, I would say, out of my element, because I felt very comfortable and welcome there. But first time being in something like that, so it was it was an awesome opportunity, and then got to connect with some amazing people like yourself, and a couple others as well. So
how did you? So what we're talking about is a book premiere event, essentially, from a writer who had written a book called. I think the book is called Psyched, I believe, right?
Correct.
And I met by Amanda Siebert, and she was having a release party, and so we both wound up at it.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of really cool people there, and
Exactly.
it was a very inviting, warm environment at a gallery on La Cienega here in Los Angeles. And how did you wind up down there? What tipped you off to the?
So I wound up out there because I had reached out to an Ibogaine center called Beyond, and I believe they were I'm not sure if they were the only people sponsoring it, but their company was sponsoring that book release, right? Okay. So I had reached out to them for the motive for me reaching out to them is because I had such a profound experience with Ibogaine myself. And since I had that experience, beginning to, I guess, embarking on a journey to align myself with something that truly resonated with me in life. Mm-hmm. So I reached out to them and want to just connect with more people in that industry. And I met one of the owners through a phone call, Talia, and she told me about the event and asked me, if I'd be willing to go so I could meet her in person. And that was, how I ended up there. So she bought me a ticket, and
you connected with her there at the event.
First time in person.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So you had been through addiction and Ibogaine as a means of transcending the addiction.
Definitely.
I had the opportunity, and I think I might have told you a little bit about this when we first connected. So a friend of mine back home had been an opioid addict for 10 years, and the last 3 years of her life were particularly harrowing, involved, jail time and all kinds of crime and living at the highest clip of poverty and desperation that a person could endure. And being able to be her friend and be in this space and trying to look at ways that I could maybe help steer her into something that could have the profound effect necessary to really move the needle for someone who's in that deep. Because it was like she was going to die at any minute, and I fully expected her always to wind up dead, or I would have to hear about it, or I wouldn't hear from her for a long time, and that was going to be the case. Wild experience. I never planned on being near anything like that, as a friend or as a colleague or whatever. So
near anything like that in terms of having a relationship with someone that was so deep into an addiction.
Yeah. Like I didn't, fortunately, no one in my immediate family has been through that. Friends that have had addiction issues closer to me haven't been that severe. So this was my first look at what a person's life feels like when they're in that deep addiction, right? And for her, it was homelessness. For her, it was prostitution. For her, it was crime, theft, and just a massive, massive emotional experience to be involved in trying to be there for somebody like that when you want to afford help as you can, but being the addict, it really separates you from so much of our normal considered reality, right? So
absolutely,
I want to hear about and give you the opportunity to share how things have transpired for you, how you got to that point, how you found yourself in addiction, how you even began to find the footing to try to help yourself to best that and to evolve and to heal. So anything that you're willing to share, I want to hear.
So it all started with a prescription, right? So I was, I've been fairly active my entire life. Got into martial arts at a young age and injured myself during martial arts, boxing, and I got prescribed opiates, right? Or opioids.
At the doctor's office.
At the doctor's, right?
Yeah.
And from
what age was this?
I'd say about 13, 14 years old, right? So, and if I recall correctly, I would say around 40 to 60 pills I was given prescribed, right?
The first round.
Correct.
Yeah. Were your parents at the clinic too, or did anybody go with you to the doctor's office?
Yeah, my mom. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember my mom went with me.
And when you got the medication, did anybody think anything of it at all?
Not really.
Yeah.
No, to be honest with you, I just remember getting it and I was so oblivious to what I was doing. I was just, taking one after the other. And I just specifically recall taking one and feeling really good, right? And then shortly after taking another one. And I went through that whole bottle so quickly that I remember when I returned to the office, to the doctor's office for the revisit, I was so unaware of what I was doing that I just blatantly asked if I could get more. And the doctor kind of, put a halt to it. And I don't believe that was the exact moment. Well, I say that that's the exact moment I feel my addiction began, although it wasn't the peak where I was at my worst moment, right? So I got introduced to it and I really enjoyed the way that it made me feel. So the addiction began more so as it would come, as I got older, I would never turn it down, right? So
I don't want to go beyond 13, 14 yet. Let's stay in the origin. So, so the initial reason for the prescription was an injury.
Yes, an injury, correct.
And what was the injury?
It was, a rib injury from boxing.
Okay, so you had a 13, 14-year-old young man with severely bruised ribs.
Correct.
And pain was the issue.
Correct.
And it wasn't going away with hot, cold compress or whatever, Tylenol, whatever.
Exactly.
And your mom's like, my son's in pain, so what can be done? And it's a family practitioner?
No.
Like a specialist
Yeah,
that you went to?
I went to a doctor. Yeah.
A pain specialist.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's pain specialist. I just remember going to the doctor, to be honest with
Somebody
you.
you hadn't been to before.
Yeah, just to a doctor. They did x-rays and then I believe they did an MRI as well. And I definitely had like some bruising or some type of ligament damage. And that's how, it resulted in me getting the prescription.
So the idea is that if you're taking pain medication, then it's easier to weather the healing process.
Exactly.
It's just going to be time that heals the injury.
Exactly.
And that's going to make it more bearable for you to get through the passage of that time.
Exactly.
Okay. Was there a conversation at the time? Say, I'm prescribing these pills for you, but you need to know that you cannot take more than the recommended dosage? Or do you recall like there being some kind of caveat when this was offered to you, or a discussion around, or was it just take one of these when you have pain?
No discussion.
No discussion.
No.
Just take it. Yeah.
Yeah, because it was literally left in my room, the bottle. So I feel like if I would have had that, if that doctor would have had the discussion with my mom present right there,
Yeah.
she would have probably not kept the bottle in my room.
Was
Right.
was your family like aware of? Did anybody have addiction issues or alcoholism or dependency on anything that you were aware of at the time?
Not opiates, and not necessarily an addiction. I mean, there was definitely drinking in the house, right? As I got older, I found out, I have family that, abused other narcotics as well, but I didn't learn about this till much later down the road. So there's definitely addictive tendencies within our family. But as far as in that moment of my life, like I wasn't aware of anyone being addicted to anything. I just know that there was alcohol present in the home. There was, a lot of, in terms of the addiction of anything substance related, there was alcohol present in the house. Correct. But I didn't realize it was an issue until much later down the road. And this was particularly to my family, my parents.
Did you have a good relationship with your mom? Could you have talked to her about concerns that you had? Was it an open relationship?
With The opiates?
No, just with your mom in general. Like, was she
Yeah.
somebody that you could talk to about problems that you had or concerns that you had? Or if you would have noticed, like, wow, I'm taking these pills, like, and I'm really liking it, could you have talked to her about it? Was it?
I could have.
Yeah.
I didn't think to. I mean, I had a great relationship with both my parents, although there was a lot of things that happened throughout my early childhood. I mean, they were very loving and caring parents, always, right? And I admire both of them.
I'm just setting the stage a little bit because it wasn't like when you took the medication, you were free from a world of suffering that you were already in.
Yeah.
You weren't escaping something necessarily. It just made something better.
At least I wasn't aware of it at that age.
Yeah. Okay.
So at that time, what I was doing, I don't believe that I had in mind that I was doing it to get high, right? I was just doing it because I was prescribed it, and then I enjoyed the way it made me feel, right? So then that's why I say it was like the beginning of the addiction, but I wouldn't recognize that it was an addiction until much later down the road. So at 13, 14 years old, when I was prescribed this medication, you know, I was so unaware of what I was doing. That's why I said when I revisited the doctor, you know, any normal person knows what you're doing. If you're abusing a substance, you're not going to go ask your doctor for more knowing that it's an issue, right?
Yeah.
So I was completely unaware of that fact. So when I went up to him, he's like, no, you're good. You're done.
How long ago was it? Or how long after the first appointment was this?
Oof, that's a good question. Probably maybe a month, 2 months or so. Yeah.
Follow up.
Yeah, like a follow-up, right? And then after that, it was done with, right? So then, you know, I was at that age and just, it was more so of a thing when it would come around throughout junior high and then eventually high school that I was open to taking it, but I wasn't proactively looking for it until much later down the road.
So other kids wound up bringing it to school or parties or whatever. Like there were pills around. You were familiar with them all.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, they were everywhere. I mean, they were easy to find at that time. For me, it was Percocets.
Percocet.
Yeah. I think that prescription was Norcos, but my drug of choice later on was primarily, well, eventually any pill I could get my hand on that was an opiate, but it was Percocets that I was really addicted to eventually.
Okay, so they were coming around and it's high school, and but you weren't actively seeking it out.
Not actively, no. Yeah, it was more of a when they came around, I'd be open to do it, right? So, I'm trying to understand. So, because it started off as it just was presented into my life, and then here and there it would come around, right? So a lot of things happened throughout that time. But what I noticed is as a young kid, right? So can I backtrack a little bit?
Please, go anywhere you need to.
Okay. So I had sustained this injury, right? As a result of boxing. Okay. And then, you know, I got introduced to painkillers, but I think there was a lot more going on just beneath the addiction for me. Right. And even at that time, because I had sustained, like, a lot of stuff happened early on in my childhood, you know, and as I got older, I wouldn't recognize this till post-treatment, post-Ibogaine treatment, right? And what I realized is that when I was growing up, specifically when I got into junior high, so I got sent to a military school in 7th grade, right? So when I got sent to this military school in 7th grade, it was a boarding school in San Diego. It was called Army Navy Academy, right? So then when I got to Army Navy Academy, you know, I was there for a year, okay? And then when I got out of that school a year later, I went to a regular middle school in the Santa Cruz Valley where I live now. So when I got to the middle school, let me see how I can best explain this. So
did you have behavioral concerns?
100%,
you were
right?
kind of acting up?
So in 7th grade, when I was at that military school, I got introduced to a lot because that school was from 7th grade to 12th grade. So you can imagine I was a 7th grader, and the way they had it set up was the new guys would get bunked. It was a boarding school, so the 7th graders would get booked up with the older kids that had already been there for years. You could stay there from 7th to 12th grade. So when I was there, I got introduced to a lot, right? And I was very frightened in the beginning because I was never been away from home. You know, I got dropped off at the school. I thought I wanted to be there. Day I got there, I found out that I didn't want to be there. They shaved my head right away, and they put me in this uniform, and they started yelling. It was a military school, right? So, and you know, it was very challenging. So when I say I got introduced to a lot, there is in the beginning I was very well behaved. And then for some reason, I started gravitating towards, you know, I guess you would say more of a negative environment, negative crowd. And I started hanging around older people, right, at that school. And at that school, I specifically recall going into it and just being I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought.
It's a long way to go back.
Yeah, so what I'm trying to get at is, I guess I'm better at assessing my addiction because I know what it was now and what it wasn't, and I was so lost during that time, right? Because when I was in military school, I was so frightened to be there, and then I got introduced to all kinds of things. I get out, I'm an insecure kid, right? I go back after the first year, 7th grade to 8th grade, I was there. 8th grade, I come back to Santa Cruz Valley.
Okay, you were there for a year.
Yeah, I was there for a year.
And when you say introduced to things, are you talking about substances or concepts? Or
marijuana. Okay. I was introduced to marijuana, pornography, right, by the older kids, right? Yeah. So I had no idea these things were even existing until I got to that school.
What did you do to warrant going to military school?
I wanted to go.
You wanted to go?
Yeah, because my father, you know, he was always showing me like military tapes, and you see people jumping off helicopters and going on these flights. And
was he in the military also?
No, he wasn't. But I had my grandfather was on his side, my dad's father.
So there was an admiration for him.
Yeah. So, and then that's why I thought I wanted to go. And then when I got there, I realized very quickly that it wasn't all the, you know, I'm in 7th grade, right? So I got introduced to a lot of things in that school from the older kids, right? Not everyone was on their best behavior at that school, right? Yeah. So I come back and I know this now, when I came back from that military school after a year being there, that I was a very insecure kid, right? I was very insecure. I had no confidence whatsoever, right? And I'm getting to the part where I really feel my path of self-destruction began, right? So I get to the school, had a few friends, and like I said, very insecure. I'm walking home one day from the school, right? It was like, we lived in Valencia. I'm walking home, and then I see there's these two kids behind me. And as I'm walking up the street, one of them shouts out, am I allowed to
go for it?
Yeah. So I'm walking up the street after school, and these two kids behind me, and one of them says, "Hey, you fucking spick." Right. So immediately I turned around and I hit him. Right. And then the kid dropped. He stood back up, hit him again, dropped. And then I walked home. He got up. Next thing I know, I'm showing up to school the next day. It's recess, break. And then the police come into the school and they arrest me in front of the whole school.
Whoa.
And I think that this was probably the worst way now I know that this was the worst way they could have gone about it, because prior to this, when I got arrested, I never had a girlfriend. Before I got arrested that day, I never had a girlfriend, right? I was very insecure. But this exact moment when I got arrested and I showed up to school however many days later after the suspension, I was the fucking man, right? So I had this external validation that I never had received before.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I was like, man, this is what I got to do. Things like this in order to receive the attention that I'm in search of. So
did anybody talk to you about what happened? What caused the fight? Like, did you have some like counseling? Was there a counselor on campus, or was anybody in the police station, or your parents? Like, was there a conversation about what provoked this moment that got you in such trouble?
Not as far as my parents know. My dad was the kind of guy, is like, he deserved it. Although I did get in trouble, I didn't get punished for it whatsoever. At least in my home, right?
Yeah.
But as far as I got to speak my part at the school, but I'm the one that got in trouble. Yeah. I don't even know if he faced any ramifications because of what he said.
The other student.
I just know that I showed up. I was at recess. Cops showed up and they pulled me out of the school. Right? So they pull me out of the school. I come back a couple days later, however many days later after the suspension. And, there it was. I had, all of a sudden I felt like I was the man. Like I was receiving all this attention. And then, this is what I feel is the beginning to the self-destructive behavior that began this, I guess, this journey of self-destructive behavior, right? So
Or
what?
pushing the envelope somehow, or
Exactly.
pushing the limits. Yeah.
Exactly. So constantly, so when I think back to who I was back then, I was always getting into fights. I was a womanizer. I was definitely broken inside, but I didn't recognize this because I was having all these external validations outside of myself to make me feel like I didn't care about anything that was happening other than, feeling like, hey, I was the guy that, was getting into fights, was getting girls. So I didn't care about anything outside of that throughout my entire life up until, eventually as you get older and people start going their different ways, I needed something to fulfill that gap because I wasn't in school anymore. So I get out of school, and then eventually throughout all this time, I'm still, indulging in drug use, not necessarily just opiates. It was cocaine, drinking, anything I could get my hands on, right? I was just having fun.
What ages was this?
It's just from junior high leading up to high school,
Okay.
right? So, these habits just went on and on and on, after I got out of school. And eventually, before you know it, I'm this dude that just gets out of high school, and I'm continuing this path of just this behavior that was just truly killing me inside. I was like suffering over it. Right.
You graduated high school.
Yeah, I graduated high school, right? So the opiate addiction, really got to its peak after I got out of high school, right? So when I say got to its peak, this means that I was a person that would wake up and think pills. I wouldn't be able to go to sleep unless I literally, it's remarkable because when I think back on it now, I was so deep in it that I wouldn't feel comfortable even going to sleep unless I had pills next to my counter because I was so afraid that the possibility, now I know this wouldn't have ever happened because no one was in my apartment except me, but thinking that someone would come and take them. So I was that deep, right? So,
And if you didn't have the pills to take, what would happen?
I would go to something called kratom.
Or what physiologically, like what was the concern?
Oh,
Like if you didn't have them,
yeah.
was there going to be a result?
I'd go into withdrawals.
Yeah, that would happen.
Yeah.
You had experienced that and you're like, I don't want to deal with that again.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I have to have this nearby.
Exactly.
But it didn't set off any alarms in your head like, okay, now I'm looking at a problem here because I'm addicted to something.
So I would like to think at that time, this is what I would tell myself, is that I didn't want to tell anyone because I was smart enough to know what I was doing was wrong, but I was always trying to convince myself that that would be all right, that I was in control of it to a certain extent, right? Mm. And, the reason I was so concerned is for that exact reason, is that I was afraid of going withdrawals and the way that I would feel after I would run out of pills, right? So, I exhausted every imaginable option you can think of to try to get sober. And I'm talking about conventional options that we have here available in the States.
So you at a certain point, you have a job and you graduated high school, you have a job,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm assuming whatever you're doing, the money's going to find your
Everything.
pills. And you were getting the pills just from people that sold them that you found?
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy because there's so many ways that I was getting them. I mean, because there's so many things that happened throughout this beginning from junior high to, early adult age, right? It's I was getting them from people that were getting prescriptions. I was getting them from crooked doctors in Los Angeles, where literally you can walk in with 3 people into a clinic. The doctor would pull you out. I don't even know how these guys found this clinic, right? It was these older guys I was hanging out with when I was younger. And its connections just seemed to fly in. And this, isn't the situation that it was before I stopped. But yeah, I knew people that were getting them, on the streets from prescriptions. And then eventually, finding these crooked clinics throughout Los Angeles. And the doctor would call in 3 people at a time. Oh, you know that these are addictive. They're not good for you. Here's your prescription. Right. And you'd pay, however much money, and you'd walk out with a prescription. So yeah, I was getting them from any means.
Okay.
Many
but then
different
it started to dawn on you that maybe you should look for a way to stop.
Yeah.
What happened in your life that made you think that you should change? Was there some kind of major moment that was like, okay, this is too real, or this is too beyond my control, or this is no longer enjoyable, or was it just a culmination of the way things had been going, or what provoked that?
So what provoked it, I feel so even as an early kid, I was in martial arts, right? So I always felt like I had a lot of potential, and I kept this hidden from the world for so long because no one expected it. I was definitely, I guess, what you would label a functioning addict, if that's even a real definition of what it is, because although I was functioning, I was still terrorizing myself, right, by abusing these pills. Mm-hmm. So I kept it hidden for a very long time until I couldn't keep it hidden anymore. Just, eventually, I don't know how I was managing. I was in phenomenal shape although I was partying, doing all this craziness. I was always in martial arts. I'm a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I was boxing when I was a kid. I competed in MMA, and I was competing in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, having success. And meanwhile, no one has any clue that I'm taking these pills. I even did my MMA fights literally right before I walked into the cage. I took a pill. Couldn't do anything without taking these pills, right? And then it started catching up on me. And I feel it started catching up on me because eventually, I was not prioritizing training. And all of a sudden, what I started prioritizing was making sure I could find more pills because they weren't as accessible, right? Eventually, law started changing, and they weren't being prescribed as easily, and it just began this downward spiral. So, the moment that I realized that I needed to make a change was, I was just at this pure point of desperation. I couldn't pinpoint an exact moment, but I just felt like my life was just falling apart all around me, right? And as it was, as I would have, and these moments would happen constantly, right? Throughout, especially later on, near the end, I guess you would say, the addiction. It was just, I was sitting in this, and I remember I was sitting in my apartment in Northridge, right? And I was watching this podcast, and at this point I had already exhausted, many different options to get sober: Suboxone, detox centers, rehabs.
You really got yourself to that point. You got yourself into these facilities. You tried the Suboxone.
Yeah, I tried it all. But I just had this addictive personality where I was just even Suboxone, Kratom. I heard about all these things having success, but then I just had this addictive personality where I just started abusing these things, right? So when I had Suboxone, it wasn't even like I was trying to get sober, although that's what they promoted as, right? A means to get off of opiates. But then I find myself abusing Suboxone.
Yeah.
I find out about Kratom. I started doing the same thing. So what Kratom turned into for me was a means to hold myself over when I couldn't find pills. Hey, let me go to a smoke shop, buy some Kratom. Yeah. I'll take some of this to get high until my plug re up, and then I'm able to use or get more pills, right? So it was just a cycle, right?
Right.
It was just substituting one thing for another, and then eventually I just realized, man, I'm fucking a wreck. I need to figure out a solution, right? So definitely depressed. I'm telling you, what started as a habit, especially in the beginning when I got introduced to painkillers, it was something that I would do maybe, let's say, just to give you a number, 10 pills would last me 2 weeks, right? And then that turned in 40 to maybe 50 pills a day near the end, a day. Literally, where I would just wake up. I'm telling you, I couldn't sleep unless I knew I had those. And if I wasn't able to get them, I was fucking hitting up any smoke shop I could to get Kratom, right? To make sure I would be at least not sick until I was able to find more. Okay, so run out of pills, find out, I'm on this Joe Rogan podcast, and I hear about him and Aubrey Marcus talking about Ibogaine, right? And how effective it is in treating opiate addiction. And I'm listening in, and I'm like, man, I'd never done a psychedelic prior to this point. And I just said, you know what? I've done everything else. I have absolutely nothing to lose. Why not? Right? So I go literally a week after finding this, coming across this podcast, I started doing some research and finding some Ibogaine centers in Mexico. And I found one in particular, and then literally a week later, I'm at an Ibogaine center, right? And I have this, it's actually a horrendous fucking experience, right? I'm not sure if I got to touch on it when I met you, but
no, that's the way we want to touch on it here.
So,
first of all, I think you're to be commended for seeing it through. Yeah. To actually, you in spite of 40 to 50 pills per day, you were proactively looking at podcasts, here for podcasts and sharing information and finding stories that you could relate to and looking for solutions. And you had a mind to do that. And you probably had a job and you had an apartment, like you had a life.
Yeah.
You didn't fall to total ruin, but that probably was looming with the
100%.
depression and not taking care of yourself physically. And so you knew better, like something within you motivated you. Okay, I got to do something, like evasive action ASAP.
Exactly.
That was, and while you were still treating your symptoms and treating your condition with the way that you were used to, you were looking for answers. So, so you find out about an Ibogaine clinic or multiple clinics that are being offered for what you're dealing with, solutions in Mexico, and you made some calls and you got a ticket and you got down there.
Yeah. So I actually didn't get a ticket. I drove down there because it was right there near the border in Tijuana. It was actually in Ensenada. So I drive down there, nervous out of my mind because I have no idea what to expect, right?
Did you have pills with you?
No, because they told me they would give. I was already out at this point, right?
Okay.
So I was out of pills, but I definitely was still taking kratom. So I remember taking kratom on the way down there
To mitigate the withdrawals.
Yeah, to mitigate the withdrawals, exactly. So, you know, get to Ensenada. I'm greeted by the facilitator who's running the program, and immediately, you know, he asked for the cash. Right. So I'm going to Mexico to have the psychedelic experience. I have no idea really what it's going to be like, but I got sold on this beautiful luxury, you know, beachfront experience that, you know, anyways, it didn't end up panning out to be that. Right. So I get down there. First thing the guy does is reaches out for the money and literally signals like this. So I give him the money. We get in the vehicle. There's 2 other heroin addicts in the vehicle, much older than I was. And the guy, I don't want to say his name, but he turns around the facilitator. And he's like, "You need morphine?" I'm like, "Yeah, definitely." So he gives me morphine. So the reason why apparently I found this out later, they do this is just to help people with the withdrawals, right? But they were feeding them to me like whenever I wanted at this center, at this specific center. So what ended up happening is after I get there, you know, they run the program, or they're giving us the rundown on how it's going to play out. In 2 days, we're going to do Ibogaine. And basically, they're just feeding me morphine the whole time. And then once I find out, I thought the experience was actually going to be at this location. Like, hey, we're going to do this experience at a hospital, right? It's going to be in a medical setting at a hospital down the road, however many miles down the road. So I said, okay. So we end up, you know, come Wednesday, when we're going to do Ibogaine, they take us to this hospital. And it's literally a house converted in like a sketchy neighborhood converted into a hospital. Right. So we walk into this room and it was me, this other guy, and then one female. She gets her own room and me and this guy get into another room. And literally as we're about to take Ibogaine, there's like emergencies happening right outside of the door that have nothing to do with what we're there for. Right. So I'm about to go into this experience, not even, you know, nervous already as it is. And then there's all this, like, I swear there was like it sounded like gunshots. It was crazy. Right. So, you know, end up having the journey and I just they administered the medicine, blacked out completely, like no revelations. All I recall is literally waking up and having no withdrawals the next morning whatsoever.
So you wound up at a kind of makeshift hospital.
Yeah.
That was dedicated solely for the administration of Ibogaine, or they were doing all kinds of
No,
stuff?
they were doing whatever there
were other emergencies going on, but it was a hospital.
Yeah, well, that's what they said. Yeah, it looked like a little. It was like a house turned into a medical.
And you thought you were going to be getting the psychedelic first time in your life administered to you while you were like in a hammock on a beach with the sun and the sand, and like it was a different. But what you were led to believe one thing from the website, and from like maybe emailing them ahead of time, and then when you got down there, the first facility you went to was like a nice place.
Yeah, it was a beachfront property.
That was it. Okay, but then the hardcore stuff was going to happen at a makeshift hospital out of town. How far away?
I'd say about 10 minutes.
Okay, so not far away, but the part, it probably wasn't a luxury town.
Exactly.
It was like kind of a town with problems and
we're in Mexico.
So and then this makeshift hospital, you lie down in a bed, a hospital bed,
Yeah.
and the other dude is with
It's
you,
literally like within arm's reach almost.
and were you guys talking about I'm freaked out, like this is how I've never done this before, or
Yeah,
here we
'cause
go,
it
this
was-
is weird, the place is weird, what's going on?
Yeah,
You had somebody
definitely.
to sort of share the experience with a little bit.
Yeah.
But you're both scared and you're both like don't know what you're getting into. They administer Ibogaine. Tell us what your understanding of Ibogaine is and was.
So like what it actually is, like where it comes from.
Yeah, like
or-
what did you like going into it? Like what did you know it to be
So I knew it to be
from
a plant.
listening to the Joe Rogan podcast?
Yeah. So I knew it to be, well, first that it was a plant or the root bark of a tree or a plant in Africa.
Yeah.
And that's what it was to me at that point. It's just the root bark of a tree. You consume it and it has extreme effect, or it's extremely effective when dealing with opiate addiction and many other addictions, and also depression, PTSD. So I was researching all of this prior to going, right? So I found it, I just knew that it was a psychedelic plant and that it had the success that it was having with opiate addiction.
What did that term mean to you at the time to hear that it was psychedelic? Like as it was explained to you through listening to podcasts or as you did your own research, like what did taking a psychedelic for you, like what do you think that was going to entail?
Oh, to be honest, I didn't even, it's hard to say. I was just such at a point of desperation in my life at that point. The only thing that was sticking out to me was that it was having success with dealing with opiate addictions, right? But as far as like the psychedelic properties of it, the psychoactive properties of it, I didn't put too much thought into it.
You didn't focus on it. It's
No,
like, I hear it works.
it
I'm gonna
almost
give it a shot.
It almost just hit me when I got there. I'm like, holy shit, I'm really gonna do this right now, right? So
how was it administered to you?
in a pill.
In a pill.
It's grinded up and put into a pill, like a
Okay.
capsule.
Uh-huh.
So I go into this experience, right? And
Well,
then
you took it and then you laid down on the bed. And did they give you a blindfold or anything?
they gave me this blind. Yeah, they gave me a blindfold. They turned off the lights and they had this. It was super ghetto. They had this like disco light playing in the room. It was fucking terrible.
Okay, was music too?
Yeah, they had like certain like ambient music.
Okay,
and,
all right. So they had a disco light
Yeah,
and ambient music, and you've got another junkie laying next to you that's going through the same thing.
Yeah.
And you take the thing, you lay down. You took it with water.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, and they're like, then did they say lay down and just let it happen?
So yeah, so basically they administered it. They gave me the pill. I take it, and then they're like 20 minutes later, we'll come see how you're doing, right? So 20 minutes later, they come and they give me like another one, and then I recall having to go to the bath. I don't know why I just kept having to go to the bathroom, and then after the second time they gave me it, I remember just going to the bathroom. I'm like, all right, something's happening right now that I'm not used to happening, right? So I'm like, I get out of the restroom, I go lay on the bed, and then the guy next to me is like, starts screaming, like, and I'm like, I've done some pretty crazy stuff throughout my life, right? And I don't think I've ever been as fearful of anything until I got to the point where I had to go do something that was going to take me out of my own headspace, I guess you would say, right?
Yeah.
So I consider myself a pretty brave dude, and then when I got to that moment, I hear this guy screaming, and then I'm feeling like all of a sudden things are changing, and it's nuts because all of a sudden I just recall just kind of blacking out, and then I wake up and they got those what are those metal when they like shock people, right?
Oh, defibrillator.
Yeah, so they didn't actually, at least they didn't shock me, but I'm gaining consciousness, and then all of a sudden I wake, I'm gaining consciousness, and they have these things on they have me wrapped up, and they have these defibrillators.
I think so.
Yeah, on my chest. And I'm like, is everything all right? Yeah, you're fine, just relax. But I'm like, man, I'm in Mexico. I don't know what the fuck is going on. All I know is I'm definitely disoriented. And the next thing I know, I'm just out again. And then I'm waking up the next morning, nauseous, puking, felt miserable, right? Literally miserable. It was like a blackout for me.
Did you feel miserable akin to withdrawal?
No.
You felt miserable,
No, just
like
nauseous.
fluey.
Yeah, just nauseous. It's absolutely crazy, right? And this is what is remarkable about Ibogaine is literally, I remember, I was just nauseous, but then I'm noticing, after kind of like, I'm done throwing up and somewhat feeling better, they take us back to that beachfront house in Ensenada, and I just feel, I'm like, holy fuck, I'm not withdrawing at all. right? So, yeah. So I get back to the hotel and I just pondering this experience, right? That I can't seem to recollect, but I'm just blown away by the fact, like, holy shit, not only am I not sick, but I feel like I've never even touched this stuff before. Like, I don't even remember what it feels like in this exact moment, right? So, yeah, that was my experience in Mexico, and then it was horrendous. But, it got the job done, at least, that time for what I went for.
So wait, so when you got back to the house, the nice property, it's wild. You woke up the first time after taking it, after blacking out, and they had like resuscitation gear ready for you. Like maybe before you woke, you were exhibiting some kind of did they have like a heart monitor on you?
Yeah,
or anything?
EKG, IV.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So they were monitoring vitals. So you woke up at some point, and maybe there was a little cause for alarm because people were kind of standing at the ready or something.
Yeah, most likely, right?
Yeah.
And to be honest, I don't know exactly what it was that happened with me. And I even asked the guy next to me, like the following days, like, dude, you just like, next thing I know, they're just wrapping you up and they have these things on you. And then he even said it was extremely uncomfortable for him because he's in his own journey and seeing me getting, so
tended to like that.
Yeah, exactly, right.
Did you have to sign a waiver before you went in saying you could kick the bucket while you're here and you're waiving us of liability or something? Do you recall?
Definitely signed some paperwork when I got there, but I don't know if it would have mattered.
Sure what it said, right? At that point, it didn't really matter as much.
Yeah.
So you woke up the second time, and that time you kind of stayed conscious.
Yeah.
And you started to notice, did you notice immediately after waking up the second time that you weren't craving?
Yeah, immediately.
Yeah.
Immediately. Like, I just know I was definitely disoriented, still not to the point where I was hallucinating.
Felt like crap.
Yeah, I felt like shit. But then then as those symptoms started subsiding, I felt much better. And I realized I'm not sick at all, right? So that was incredible for me personally, because to have found something that made to get me through the worst part of it was beautiful.
Yeah.
Right.
How much time lapsed, like from taking the pill to waking up the second time? Is it one night?
Yeah. So the experience lasts, they say that the whole journey could last anywhere up to 24, maybe to 32 hours. Right. But I don't believe it's very accurate. Well, at least for me personally, it wasn't, right? I was definitely maybe peaking for however long, but the thing is that I blacked out on that first journey, right? But I definitely, by the time I was waking up, it was, sun was coming up, and although I was still very disoriented, when you do Ibogaine, it literally feels like you can't even stand on your own 2 feet. It's almost as if like your knees aren't able to withstand your body weight. So you're like walking around kind of like stumbling. You almost need a hand just to get around. And this was like for like a couple days.
Oh, still. Wow.
Yeah.
So the effect of the session, you're calling it a journey, and that your bunkmate was on his journey as well. Why do you describe it as a journey? Did you have the sensation of traveling? Did you have the sensation of going through something, or just being blacked out? Because were there visuals associated with it? Was there an experience that you remember?
Yeah.
Were you having a kind of dreamlike experience, or like while you were blacked out, what was happening? Can you recall?
So I'll describe it to the best of my ability before I blacked out. So there was definitely some visuals, right? And the visuals were, to make it make sense, when I was growing up, I always hung around a bad crowd, right? I got involved into a lot of, I guess you would label me, I was a troublemaker, right? So, and I always was hanging out with people that had, that were kind of drawn to, I guess, that gang culture. So when I got to the visuals that I was having, and I don't know how this even makes sense or why this happened. I guess none of it does in its own way. They're all unique, right? So I specifically remember being at a bar, right? On my first time doing Ibogaine. I was at a bar, and I remember there's all these people drinking, and then a fight breaks out, right? So this fight breaks out, and the next thing you know, I'm in the middle of it, and my shirt gets pulled off of me, and my body's covered in tattoos that one would assume are gang related, right? So I see, someone pointing to my tattoos, and they start shouting, and this is literally start shouting pandillero, which is gang member in Spanish, right? So then I look up, and we're all well informed that cartels are, everyone's frightened to go to Mexico because of cartels, right? So I look up and I see this billboard, and the billboard says all United States gang members get killed by the cartel, right? So the next thing I know, I'm getting tied up and I'm getting taken away into this, these hills, and I'm just watching myself get shot. And then that's like when I blacked out, right? So literally, this is what I saw in that journey, right? So the lesson in that for me, I had a lot of, I guess you would say, to be quite honest with you, just violent tendencies growing up. I was fighting all the time. I was, I wasn't involved in gangs, right? But I associated myself with people. We definitely thought we were part of that culture. And I was influenced by it. And, I covered up my bodies in tattoos and things that are irrelevant to me now, right? And then at that time, I had gotten in so many fights growing up throughout my entire life. I probably hurt a lot of people, not just, physically, and I got hurt as well, right? And then I had this revelation on Ibogaine that it made me realize that, I was willing to, basically, I thought maybe, I don't know if I was actually willing to or not, that I was actually willing to possibly die for something that had no relevance to me whatsoever. And it was a huge wake-up call for me, because I literally thought that I died in that moment, right? On Ibogaine. And next thing I know, I'm blacking out and I'm waking up, and I'm, although, I was still disoriented, I was crying. I was, I definitely released a lot of emotions, the subsequent days. And yeah. So, I mean, that's when I say a journey, I feel like, yeah, maybe that was the journey that I experienced to make me have this realization, right? Post-treatment.
You said you've used Ibogaine more than once.
Twice. So
the first time you recovered at the facility, and then eventually you made your way back home.
Exactly. So there's so much to say. So, and it gets confusing for me personally at times, because I've never had to articulate it in this way. So
thanks for trying.
Yeah. So after my first experience at Ibogaine, I go home. I have no, I guess what you would call no plan of action, right? So
I wanted to ask you, was there somebody at the beach resort in a kind of counselor capacity? Was there somebody that like sat and talked to you about next steps or integration, or like you've just had this experience? Would you like to share with me what was entailed for you, and how do you see your life changing from here on? Did you have a coach or somebody there?
No, there was people there, like a medical staff, and I guess you would say a counselor.
Yeah.
And they would talk to us, and I was just telling, because I had never experienced anything like this before, right? So I go there.
Very vulnerable for you.
Exactly. It was very vulnerable, out of my element completely. Yeah. So I go in there, had the experience, and the subsequent days, I'm like, just, I had this, my body's covered in tattoos, right? For things that I did when I was young. And having that journey, I remember just having this thought where when I, afterwards, when I was speaking to this counselor, I told him, I'm just so fucking mad at myself that I have to wake up every day and look at this fucking man that's covered in tattoos, right? I know I'm a good-hearted dude, and I made a lot of poor choices throughout my life, and unfortunately, I got wrapped up with the wrong crowd. I didn't, at that particular time, I started, just got easily influenced by an older crowd that, didn't give a fuck to tell me, hey, dude, you need to kick back, because I was definitely one of the worst ones eventually, and just started, So anyways, I got, I just remember speaking to this person named Mario, and I told him, like, man, and I started crying as I was telling him, because I'm like, dude, I covered my whole fucking body up with all these tattoos, and I'm just like, I had this like, and these are all revelations maybe that I had from this experience, right? Where it's like allowing me, it almost put me more in touch with my spirituality, right? Where it's like, dude, I actually, like, I'm a good person that fucking tried to create this persona of someone that was not who I was, right? So I created this image of myself because I had suppressed all these fucking emotions throughout my entire life. And I was seeking out validation through any means necessary to make me feel like I was important, right? So, and then I would recognize that a lot of this, my addiction was fueled from sexual abuse from when I was a kid, physical abuse. And then it just, I'd become this expert at suppressing my emotions subconsciously. I wasn't even aware that I was doing it.
How did that revelation come up for you? Like, because that wasn't something you went into the session mindful of, right?
No, it's fucking crazy, right? I didn't go to school to learn any of this. This is all as a result of this experience with Ibogaine. I started interacting and engaging with my own self, with my own thoughts more, right? So I went in. The only motive that I had to go do Ibogaine was to get off of opiates, right? I wasn't thinking anything else. And then I realized through these experiences, I know I'm trying my best not to jump around so much, but
it's fine.
As a result of these experiences, I've realized that my addiction was a surface level issue.
Yeah.
It was minor in comparison to what really needed to be dealt with, right? Yeah. And after I began, I had this moment of clarity, and it literally, I don't know how these words came to me, right? But it was literally something along the lines of, how will I ever heal if I don't allow myself to feel what's necessary to be felt in order to begin that path of healing? Right. So I took that in, and I recognized, I'm like, fuck, the reason why I'm not able to heal, I'm not able to surpass this addiction is because I'm broken from all these things that happened before in my life that I was paying no mind to. I was just so focused on getting clean, so focused on the addiction, that eventually it took this experience and more to realize that it was what I had been suppressing my entire life, which was sexual abuse, physical abuse, and then the fact that I'd covered up my body. I was already insecure as it was. And then I started covering up my body with all these tattoos that now, I got older, I realized just how unhappy I was with myself and my presence. So, yeah.
So you decided at a certain point, like after coming back and did you have anybody in your world, any friends, family, loved ones that you could like share your revelations with, or like help, like, again, integrate it into your new experience? Because did you feel like you had a fresh start when you came back home?
I did, right? Yeah. But there's such an importance that needs to be, I feel, put out there on the integration part of it, right? And I didn't come home with a plan of action after this. I kind of just, I went, although I did black out and I had small moments of clarity and those visions, and I refer to it as a journey, I came home and kind of gradually just fell back into the old patterns, right? And then eventually I was like, you know what? Although that I stayed clean for a good amount of time after that, I realized that was fucking the best thing I had done. That had more success than anything else I ever did. So let me now give ayahuasca a chance, right? Let me start exploring these different healing modalities, because clearly it was very effective, and I was on this high for, I'd say, about 3 to 4 months.
A high of
like
peace?
Yeah, just confidence? Peace of mind. I felt confident. I just felt better about myself. I was free. I wasn't taking opiates. And yeah, I just felt like I was on this momentum, but then I just began this decline because I just kind of fell back into old patterns. I didn't
mean you started using the pills again?
Yeah, exactly.
What was going through your head when we made that decision? Like you just didn't have anything set. You couldn't see any runway for yourself that was really that different.
Exactly.
You hadn't enabled yourself to like visualize how to build that and how to act it out.
Exactly, and I wouldn't learn this until my second Ibogaine experience, but it was because the addiction wasn't the only issue, right? It's like I came home, I took care of the issue, but I didn't start doing any self-work, right? I didn't start really digging deep, like why was I...
You had an inkling after the first go-around that this is about more than my addiction, and it's about things I've never addressed before.
Exactly.
But you didn't have like a real plan
to attack it, right? It was like the thought was there, but I didn't take action on it. Right. And I feel like that's key. And what's been so successful for me now, this time around, is I came home after that second experience with a plan of action. And I really just put my focus, okay, clearly a lot of addicts, what I've recognized is we've demonstrated that we have the ability at certain times to get through those withdrawals, right? But why does everyone fall back and relapse? It's because they get hit with reality of all the shit they've been suppressing that they can't handle, they can't bear. It's unbearable. So then they start using again. That's what was happening. That's what happened with me after the first time with Ibogaine.
Okay, so after the first time of Ibogaine, there was another psychedelic intervention. You decided to set one up for yourself.
Correct.
But it wasn't Ibogaine again, it was ayahuasca?
I went and did ayahuasca. Correct.
And how long after the Ibogaine experience and where did you wind up going?
I say after the Ibogaine experience, about 6 months. And I went to Peru, to the jungle in Iquitos. Yeah, so it was very powerful, the experience. I went to Iquitos. I stayed in the jungle for 2 weeks, did ayahuasca. Yeah, came back and had a very profound experience, but I still felt like there was something missing, right? And actually after ayahuasca, it was like, again, I was on this momentum, right? Where it felt like I just had this beautiful experience, but there was still something missing, and I was still trying to find and understand what it was, right? So I wanted to give Ibogaine another chance, right? Because I felt like out of those two experiences, the Ibogaine was the most powerful. Definitely it resonated with me more. So decided to do Ibogaine again, but this time in the States, right? And then that's really was the breakthrough moment for me, where I realized that the issue wasn't necessarily the addiction, it was everything that was fueling it, which was those suppressed emotions, that broken kid, that broken, young boy that never really had any self-worth. I didn't have self-worth up until that point, right? And then until I had that second experience, it was a completely different experience from the first one, and it turned my life around.
Joseph, where are we at on time? 5 minutes. Okay, we got 5 minutes.
Okay,
Dude, we've covered so much ground.
Yeah, I know. And it's hard because it's such a. I guess I hadn't done a podcast. I've never done a podcast, right? So to prepare, it's such a long story.
Yeah, and it's a preposterous notion to distill it all down
in 1 hour. To be honest with you, it's hard for me because it's like, fuck, I could go back and forth. There's so many things that the beauty of my story happened obviously after I got sober, after my second experience doing Ibogaine. Everything that happened before prepared me for that moment. The second time I did Ibogaine, right? I did Ibogaine the second time, and there's so many things that happened differently that I didn't do the first time I did Ibogaine. For instance, I was taking morphine when I did Ibogaine the first time, right? They were feeding me a bunch of food when they gave me prior to going and doing Ibogaine the first time, which is what I believe attributed to the reason why I blacked out. And the way they dosed me all that, basically in 2 doses. The second time I did it, I fasted. I went into the journey in withdrawal, right? And I was dosed completely differently, where it was like a small dose until I got to that peak. And it was like, I recall that whole journey, but not enough time to talk about that second journey, which is the most beautiful one.
Why don't we just make it a point to come back and do this part 2?
Yeah, no, whenever. And
let's come back and do part 2, because I think we've set up a good chunk of what I think it'll be easier for you to kind of get through and share next time too, now that we've sort of laid the groundwork. Because like you've already said, getting the treatment, realizing that you can get a break from that grip of the addiction, the withdrawal sickness, like that the clouds can part is one thing.
Yeah.
Actually knowing how to make it last and how to integrate what you've learned and the experience of getting that vulnerability and like being in that healing space, like that's what we'll get into again, and how you've set your own life up for success. And I want to thank you for coming out and doing a podcast for the first time and working through, these stories to share. And I love that you found this information by digging around on your own. And that like somebody could hear what you're saying, and get inspired too, right?
Yeah, I would hope so. I mean, because it's the reason why I'm so grateful. Although that I didn't have success that first time, I realized I'm like, man, there's something here, right? And that was the moment of clarity for me, where it opened up my mind to be willing to even continue working with these different substances, right, and plant medicine. So yeah, I try to do my best,
Yeah.
you know, to explain as best as I could. And I got stumped a lot because I'm like, man, it's like, I don't know where to start, where to begin, you know, and so I apologize for that as well.
No, you're great. We'll come back for round 2 and we'll see it through to a righteous conclusion.
Sounds good.
All right, buddy. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.